The book of Habakkuk revealed 23 shocking lessons most Christians never heard. Have you ever looked at the world and felt overwhelmed by injustice? Have you ever cried out to God, asking why the wicked seem to prosper while the righteous suffer? If so, you are not alone. More than 26 centuries ago, a prophet named Habakkuk stood in that same place, between heartbreak and hope, between fear and faith, between silence and revelation. But Habakkuk was not an ordinary prophet. He did not merely repeat what God had said. He brought the pain of the people directly before the throne of heaven. He dared to ask the questions many of us are too afraid to voice. And the incredible thing is, God answered, not with silence, but with prophecy, not with explanations, but with a vision, not with temporary comfort, but with eternal perspective. This book is not a forgotten scroll. It is a divine survival guide for every believer standing in the chaos of a broken world. It speaks to us now more than ever, in a time when darkness seems louder than truth and justice feels delayed. In this video, we will uncover 23 shocking and rarely explored lessons that will challenge your faith, ignite your spirit, and open your eyes to the hidden hand of God in history and in your life. We're about to expose the spirit of Babylon still active in our generation. We're going to discover the meaning behind the famous verse, "The just shall live by faith." We will stand in the watchtower with the prophet, learn how to wait for vision, and find joy even when the fig tree does not blossom. Now take a moment to comment below. If God were to answer your deepest question right now, what would you ask him? And if this message resonates with your soul, do not keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and hit subscribe so you never miss a new revelation. We are building a prophetic community that seeks truth, goes deeper, and refuses to settle for shallow faith. Before we begin, let us pray together. Lord, we come before you not just to be informed, but to be transformed. Speak through the ancient voice of Habakkuk. Open our hearts to your justice, your mercy, and your unshakable word. Give us faith to wait, courage to speak, and eyes to see your hand in the storm. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now let us go deeper. A prophet who questions God. Text base. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity, and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife, and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore perverse judgment proceeds. The book of Habakkuk does not begin with a sermon, it begins with a burden. The prophet is not delivering a message to the people, he is delivering a complaint to God. That alone makes Habakkuk different from most prophets in Scripture. His voice is not echoing divine commands. His voice is trembling with questions that burn in the hearts of the righteous when heaven seems silent and injustice fills the streets. He dares to ask what many of us only think in secret. How long, Lord, will you remain silent? Why do you let me see so much evil and do nothing? Why is violence unchecked and the law ignored? Why does justice feel so delayed or distorted? Habakkuk does not accuse God, but he does confront him with honest pain. This is not rebellion. This is not disrespect. This is the cry of a faithful heart that cannot reconcile what it believes about God with what it sees in the world. He is overwhelmed, not just by the evil around him, but by the apparent silence of God in the face of it. He sees corruption, oppression, injustice, and violence rising, and wonders if God has turned his face away. What makes this moment powerful is that God does not rebuke Habakkuk for asking, because reverent questions rooted in faith are not an insult to God. They are the beginning of deeper revelation. And that is the first lesson for us. God is not afraid of your questions. God is not offended by your wrestling. He welcomes your honesty. especially when your heart remains anchored in Him. Habakkuk shows us that prophetic prayer is not passive. It is bold, it is raw, it is willing to bring hard questions to the throne of a holy God and wait for an answer. And maybe today you are like Habakkuk. Maybe you have cried, "How long? How long will injustice reign in my city? How long will my prayers go unanswered? How long will the wicked seem to win and the righteous suffer silently?" If that's you, this book was written for you, because God does answer. But before the answer comes, God allows space for the question, because He is not just forming theology, He is forming prophets. Habakkuk's honesty opens the door to vision. His complaint becomes a conversation, and his tears become the soil for a revelation that will endure until the end of the age. Let this first lesson settle deep in your soul. Frustration is not failure. Honest struggle does not disqualify faith. God welcomes what is real. He invites us to bring every burden, every doubt, every cry, and when we lay it all before Him, not in performance but in truth, He responds, not always in our timing, not always with the answer we expect, but always with presence, always with purpose. Those who wait in the tension often receive the clearest vision. Those who dare to speak with God from a place of pain are often the ones entrusted with a word that shapes generations. So bring it all. Let the tears fall. Let the silence stretch. And trust that in the stillness God is preparing to speak God's unexpected answer. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 5 through 6. Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days, which you would not believe though it were told you. For indeed I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth, to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. God answers Habakkuk's honest, desperate cry, but not in the way the prophet expected. Habakkuk cried out for justice. He wanted righteousness to rise. He wanted evil to fall. He wanted revival. And God says, "Watch. I'm about to do something so shocking, so unexpected, that even if I explained it to you in detail, you would not believe it." Then comes the surprise. God says He is raising up the Chaldeans, better known as the Babylonians, a fierce, brutal, violent people, conquerors, destroyers, idolaters, and yet God says, "I am raising them up." Not Satan, not coincidence, not chaos. I am raising them. This is one of the most theologically uncomfortable declarations in Scripture. God uses a wicked nation to bring judgment on His own people. Why? Because the people of Judah had hardened their hearts. They had turned to idols. They had ignored justice. They had defiled the temple, silenced the prophets, and played religion while violence and corruption filled the land. And now, God says He will use Babylon as His instrument of discipline. This lesson forces us to confront a truth most Christians would rather avoid. God is sovereign, even over what we consider unthinkable. He does not cause evil. He does not delight in wickedness. But in His infinite wisdom, He will use even the broken systems of this world to accomplish His holy purposes. He can use Pharaoh to harden Israel's faith. He can use Cyrus to set His people free. He can use Babylon to purify Judah. He can use a storm to reposition a prophet. And He can use a cross, the most brutal instrument of torture in human history, to redeem the world. This is where our theology is tested. Can we still trust God when His methods offend our expectations? Because when Habakkuk hears this, he is not relieved. He is shaken. God's justice is real, but His ways are not predictable. And sometimes the answer to our prayer is not immediate comfort, but divine disruption. When God says He is working, do not assume He will work the way you planned. Do not mistake silence for absence, and do not mistake activity for approval. Sometimes God's answer will shake your theology so that your faith can stand on something deeper than your assumptions. Because in the end, He is not just trying to fix the world, He is refining the hearts of His people. The Babylonian spirit in prophecy. Text base. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 7 through 11. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses also are swifter than leopards, and more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead, their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. They all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. They gather captives like sand. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They deride every stronghold, for they heap up earthen mounds and seize it. Then his mind changes, and he transgresses. He commits offense, ascribing this power to his God. God does not just announce that he is raising up the Babylonians. He describes them in terrifying detail. The picture is violent, fast, unstoppable, like a wild beast hunting its prey, like an eagle swooping in for the kill. They move with brutal speed and take captives like sand, too many to count, too fast to resist. Their horses, their warriors, their weapons, their arrogance, none of it is random. It is precise, prophetic, and chilling. But God is not just giving Habakkuk a military report. He is unveiling a spiritual reality, because Babylon is not just a nation. Babylon is a spirit, a prophetic symbol. A system of human pride, godless power, and spiritual rebellion that rises again and again throughout history. In Genesis, we first see Babel, humanity building a tower to heaven, trying to reach divinity on their own terms. It was pride wrapped in progress, and God scattered them. In the book of Daniel, Babylon returns. This time as a golden empire filled with idols, occult knowledge, and persecution against the faithful. Daniel had to resist the king's food, the king's image, and the king's law. But Babylon does not end in the Old Testament. In the book of Revelation, Babylon reappears, mysterious, seductive, powerful, global. It is the prostitute who rides the beast. It is the corrupt system that deceives nations, makes war against the saints, and drinks the blood of the prophets. It is no longer just an empire of brick and stone. It is a spiritual system, one that exalts self, mocks God, and controls through fear, wealth, and deception. And here in Habakkuk, God is showing us the original pattern. The spirit of Babylon is fierce, arrogant, and ruthless. It mocks kings, breaks laws, builds empires, and then praises its own strength as if it were divine. It conquers nations, but it also seeks to conquer hearts. It wants you to trust in power, not in God. It wants you to bow to fear, not to faith. It wants you to accept injustice as normal and to normalize compromise in the name of survival. And the shocking part is, God allowed it. Not forever, but for a season, because the people had stopped listening, because the covenant had been broken, because judgment had to come before restoration. But Babylon is not eternal. Its end is written. Its fall is guaranteed. And every time it rises again in a new form, God raises up a remnant, those who live by faith, not fear. So the third lesson is clear. The Babylonian system is not just ancient history, it is active now. It lives in corrupt politics, it lives in compromised churches, it lives in systems that promote pride over purity, dominance over love, and human power over divine presence. But if you recognize it, you can resist it. If you see it for what it is, you will not be seduced by its gold or silenced by its threats. Because Babylon may rise, but the righteous will stand, and the kingdom of our God will outlast every empire of man. When God's plan offends your faith. Text base. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 12 through 13. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O Rock, you have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil. and cannot look on wickedness? Why do you look on those who deal treacherously, and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Habakkuk has just heard God's answer. The Lord is raising up Babylon to judge Judah, but instead of feeling reassured, the prophet is disturbed, deeply disturbed. His theology collides with divine reality, and his faith trembles under the weight of contradiction. He begins with reverence. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? He knows who God is. He confesses God's sovereignty. He acknowledges that God is the rock, unchanging, righteous, just. But then comes the tension. How can a holy God, whose eyes are too pure to even look at evil, use a nation more wicked than Judah to bring judgment? It offends his understanding of justice, it disrupts his framework of holiness, and it makes him question what seems morally inconsistent. Why would a perfect God allow a corrupt empire to destroy a people who, despite their failures, still bear his name? This moment is holy, because here the prophet is not losing faith, he is wrestling with it, and God allows the wrestling. Sometimes the greatest test of faith is not when God is silent, it is when he speaks, and you don't like the answer. This is the place where many believers get stuck. We say we want God's will, until his will crosses our expectations. We trust his plan, until his plan offends our sense of fairness. But this lesson teaches us something rare and necessary. God does not need to fit into our definitions of justice in order to remain holy. He is not obligated to explain himself before he moves. He is not limited by what seems fair from our limited human perspective. He sees the end from the beginning. He weighs generations, not moments. He deals with sin at the root, not just the surface. And if his methods stretch your theology, it's not because he's wrong, it's because your view is too small. Habakkuk feels the dissonance. He sees Judah's failure. But Babylon is worse. Surely God must have a better plan. Surely judgment should begin with the wicked, not be carried out by them. But here is the truth. Sometimes God will use the unthinkable to awaken the unrepentant. He will allow discomfort to stir desperation. He will permit disruption to provoke dependence. He will raise up what looks like chaos to bring his people back to covenant. There are moments when trusting God means surrendering your logic, when his timing feels delayed, when his strategy seems backwards, when he allows what you thought he would surely prevent, and still he remains holy. This is where real faith is formed, not in the absence of questions, but in the presence of unwavering trust. Faith is not built only on what God does. Faith is built on who God is, even when his ways are hard to understand. And when your faith survives that tension, it becomes deeper, not driven by emotion, but rooted in conviction, not shaken by circumstance, but anchored in truth. This is the kind of faith that endures. This is the kind of faith that matures. This is the kind of faith that cannot be shaken. The prophet takes his post. Text base. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 1. I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart, and watch to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer when I am corrected. After the weight of divine contradiction, after the shock of God's answer, after the questions that shattered his expectations, Habakkuk does not walk away. He does not quit the conversation. He does not harden his heart or turn his back on the mystery. Instead, he does something radical. He climbs the wall, he takes his post, and he waits. This single verse contains a world of revelation, because it shows us what true prophetic maturity looks like, not demanding control, not rushing to conclusions, not preaching ahead of clarity, but standing, watching, waiting. Habakkuk positions himself like a watchman on the wall. In ancient cities, the watchtower was a place of vision and vigilance. It was elevated, isolated, uncomfortable, but it gave the prophet a view others could not see. It was not a place of ease, it was a place of discipline. This is where revelation is born, not in the noise, not in the crowd, but in the quiet heights of surrender, where pride dies and clarity begins. Habakkuk says, I will watch to see what he will say. Not just hear, but see. Because when God speaks, his word paints pictures, it births vision. It marks your spirit with what's coming before it arrives. But notice what else he says, and what I will answer when I am corrected. This is powerful. Habakkuk does not assume he is right. He expects that God's response may confront him, and he prepares his heart to receive correction with humility. This is the posture that unlocks the next level of spiritual vision. When you can wait with expectation, stand with reverence, and stay still long enough for your assumptions to be broken. In a culture that demands instant answers, Habakkuk teaches us prophetic patience, the kind that waits for the appointed word, the kind that chooses silence over speculation, the kind that understands that true revelation does not come to the impulsive, it comes to the faithful watcher. Will you take your post? Will you climb above the noise, the fear, the opinions, and the pressure? Will you watch until he speaks, no matter how long it takes? Because some visions are not given to the crowd. They are reserved for those who choose the wall, those who are willing to wait, those who are ready to be corrected, those who are not seeking applause, but truth. Revelation is coming, but it does not come to those who demand. It comes to those who watch. Write the vision. Text base. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. Then the Lord answered me and said, Write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. God answers the watchman, but not with comfort, not with a soothing word. He answers with a commission. He gives the prophet an assignment. Write the vision. God is not only interested in speaking to Habakkuk. He wants the message preserved for generations. He wants the vision documented. He wants the revelation to outlive the man who receives it. Because there are some truths too important to be left to memory, some instructions too holy to be whispered and forgotten, some prophecies too eternal to remain in the air. They must be carved in stone, written on tablets, made plain for all to see. Write the vision, make it plain. This is not just about communication, it's about clarity. It's about removing the fog from the message so that the one who reads it can run with it. Because revelation is not meant to be admired, it is meant to be moved with. The vision is not for your personal inspiration. It is a divine assignment, burning with eternal timing, and that timing does not revolve around your impatience. God says the vision is for an appointed time. That means there is a divine calendar in heaven, and no amount of fear, frustration, delay, or desire can change it. It will not arrive early. It will not arrive late. It will arrive at the appointed time. And even if it seems to tarry, even if it looks delayed in human terms, God says wait, because what he speaks will not lie. What he promises will not fail. And when the moment comes, the vision will speak louder than any voice on earth. This is where prophetic timing meets prophetic faith. Not only must we receive revelation, we must steward it, protect it, preserve it, and wait for its fulfillment. Because when the word is written and the heart is patient, heaven will move in unstoppable power. What God shows you must be written, not only for your sake, but for the sake of the next runner, the one who will read it and run further than you, the one who will build on what you heard, the one who will carry the vision into its season of fulfillment. You are not just a receiver of revelation, you are a steward of legacy. Write the vision, make it plain, and when the time comes, watch it speak. The just shall live by faith. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 4. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. One verse, two destinies. Habakkuk stands in the watchtower, still processing what God is revealing. He hears of Babylon's rise, of judgment to come, of vision that waits. And then, in the midst of it all, God speaks a phrase that would echo across centuries and reshape the world. The just shall live by faith. This is not just poetry, it is a declaration. It is the dividing line between those who collapse under pressure and those who stand on promises, between those who rely on pride and those who trust in God. This verse changed the course of history. It was quoted by Paul in Romans, Galatians, and by the writer of Hebrews. It became the theological foundation of the Protestant Reformation. It shook empires, redefined righteousness, and set multitudes free from legalism and religious bondage. But it began here, in the mouth of a trembling prophet, staring down the terror of Babylon, looking for hope in a collapsing world. Behold the proud. His soul is not upright. The proud man lives by ego. He trusts in his strength, his plans, his empire. But that path leads to destruction. But the just, the righteous, the ones who are made right with God, they live by faith, not by emotion, not by explanation, not by what they see, but by what they believe. This is more than just believing in God. It is trusting Him when nothing makes sense. It is living as if His word is truer than your feelings, as if His promises are stronger than your fears, as if His character is unshakable even when the ground is shaking beneath your feet. To live by faith is to walk into uncertainty with confidence, not in yourself, but in the One who called you. It is to plant your feet on the invisible and say, I will not be moved. It is to worship in the wilderness, to wait when others run, to obey when others panic. Faith is not weakness. Faith is war. It is the inner battle between sight and spirit, between impulse and truth, between despair and hope. And this one sentence in Habakkuk reveals God's answer to all generations. When the world shakes, the just shall live by faith. Faith is not just how we start the journey, it is how we survive it. Faith is not just the doorway, it is the foundation. And when Babylon rises, when vision delays, when fear whispers and when justice feels far, faith stands. Faith sees beyond the storm. Faith lives where the proud will fall. The downfall of the arrogant. Text base. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 5. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home. Because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death, and cannot be satisfied, he gathers to himself all nations, and heaps up for himself all peoples. God now begins to pronounce judgment, not just on Babylon as a nation, but on the spirit behind it. And it starts with a diagnosis of the arrogant soul. This verse is more than a political statement. It is a mirror for every heart that trusts in self over God. It is a warning to every system, empire, and individual driven by pride, greed, and domination. He transgresses by wine. This is more than drunkenness. It speaks of indulgence, addiction, the inability to control desire. The arrogant soul is driven by appetite, not truth, by impulse, not discipline. He is a proud man. Pride is not just an attitude. It is a spiritual poison that blinds you to truth and isolates you from grace. It makes you believe you are invincible, unstoppable, untouchable. But pride always precedes collapse. He does not stay at home. This speaks of restlessness, an inability to be content. The proud heart is always chasing more land, more power, more recognition. But no amount of conquest can satisfy the emptiness within. He enlarges his desire as the grave. Hell is never full, and neither is the arrogant soul. No matter how much it gathers, it always wants more. It consumes people, nations, and resources without end. This is not just about Babylon. It's about every age where power becomes a god and greed becomes a gospel. He heaps up nations and peoples. He treats lives like trophies. He turns conquest into identity, but what he builds will not last. Because what is built on pride is destined to fall. This verse exposes a pattern seen in every empire that defies God. First comes indulgence, then arrogance, then restlessness, then greed, then collapse. And this pattern is not just historical, it is spiritual. It lives in governments. It lives in corporations. It lives in religious institutions. It can even live inside us when we trade dependence on God for self-exaltation. Pride is the seed of destruction. No matter how strong, how rich, or how successful something looks on the outside, if it is rooted in arrogance, it will fall. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And when judgment comes, it always begins with the proud. Woe to those who build empires through blood. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. Will not all these take up a proverb against him and a taunting riddle against him and say, Woe to him who increases what is not his, how long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city, and of all who dwell in it. This is the first of 5 woes, and it begins with God confronting the foundational sin of empires, theft, oppression, and the shedding of innocent blood. God is no longer just describing Babylon. He is indicting them. He is unveiling the spiritual crimes that lie beneath their military victories and national power. This is divine courtroom language, and the charge is serious. You have increased what is not yours. You have built wealth on the backs of the weak. You have acquired power through exploitation. You have shed blood to gain land. The prophet says, Woe! This is not a word of pity, it is a word of judgment. It is God's holy resistance to a system that prospers by oppression, and he makes it clear, the very people you exploited will rise against you. The nations you plundered will plunder you. The blood you spilled is crying out for justice, and justice is coming. These verses are shockingly relevant to our generation. Because the spirit of empire is still alive. It builds wealth through manipulation. It enslaves through debt. It silences the poor. It ignores the cries of the oppressed in the name of economic growth. But God sees it all. He sees every hidden transaction, every unjust system, every contract built on deceit, every government that profits from violence, every structure that enriches a few by crushing the many. And here is the terrifying truth. What looks stable in the eyes of man is trembling under the weight of divine justice. Because justice delayed is not justice denied. The scales of heaven are never broken. And when God says, How long? Judgment is near. God will not let injustice stand forever. Empires may rise by blood, but they will fall by judgment. And the church must never align with systems that God has already declared guilty. We are not called to admire Babylon. We are called to expose it. We are called to stand for justice, even when it costs us comfort. Because when God says woe, it is not a warning to ignore. It is a final call before the fall. Woe to those who build on injustice. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. The second woe strikes at something many consider noble, building a legacy, a house, a future. But God sees deeper. He sees not just what we build, but how we build it. And when wealth, safety, and legacy are built on the backs of others, God responds with holy fire. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house. This is not just about greed. It is about strategy rooted in selfishness. It is about using others silently, systematically, to elevate yourself, your family, your security, your name. Set his nest on high, like an eagle building its nest beyond the reach of trouble. It looks wise, it looks successful, but in the eyes of heaven, it is a monument to injustice. God says, you think you are building safety, but you are sinning against your own soul. Because injustice, even when hidden, poisons the foundation. And God promises it will not stay hidden forever. The stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. This is one of the most haunting verses in the prophets. It means that the very materials of your success will testify against you. The walls of your house know how it was built. The structure you trust will one day speak. This is more than poetic language. It is prophetic warning. Unconfessed injustice is never silent in eternity. Every dollar gained through manipulation, every deal made with deception, every opportunity seized through oppression, every promotion secured by betrayal, every system that favors the few while crushing the many. It may be quiet now, but it is echoing in the courts of heaven. And when God rises to judge, even the stones will have a voice. What you build matters, but how you build it matters more. If you construct your legacy on exploitation, it will not protect you. If you rise by stepping over others, God Himself will bring you down, because hidden sin never stays hidden forever, and God defends the voices the world tries to silence. Let your life be built on righteousness. Let your legacy be clean. Let your house be filled with peace, not stolen cries echoing from the walls. Woe to those who build cities with blood. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 12 through 14. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. This third woe shifts the focus from individuals to entire societies. God is no longer just speaking to the greedy or the corrupt businessman. He is confronting nations, cities, empires, and He reveals a truth few are willing to face. Some cities are built on blood, not on righteousness, not on justice, but on exploitation, violence, and systemic iniquity. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. This is more than war. This is institutional sin. This is legal injustice, cultural corruption, and political power structures that enrich the elite while devouring the innocent. God is exposing the foundations, because cities can look clean on the outside while being soaked in hidden blood. Nations can prosper while ignoring the cries of the oppressed, and God sees it all. But then comes the stunning shift. After verses of judgment, verse 14 bursts into the scene like light breaking through clouds. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. This is not denial. This is divine promise. God is not just tearing down the kingdoms of man. He is preparing the rise of His own kingdom. It is as if God is saying, let Babylon build its cities, let empires rise and fall, let blood cry out from the streets. But there is a day coming when the knowledge of my glory will fill the earth, not just the temple, not just the nation of Israel, the earth, and not a shallow knowledge, but a deep immersive flood of revelation, as the waters cover the sea. This is revival. This is justice. This is prophetic reversal. Where sin once ruled, glory will reign. Where blood once stained the ground, truth will flow like rivers. Where pride once built towers to heaven, the presence of God will descend and fill the nations. God sees the blood that built the systems of man, but He is not finished. Judgment may come to what is corrupt, but glory is coming to what is holy. The kingdoms of this world are temporary, but the knowledge of God will saturate the earth, unstoppable, undeniable, and eternal. Let your eyes not only weep for injustice, let them burn with hope for what's coming. The darkness will not have the final word. The glory of the Lord will. Woe to corrupt leaders who shame others. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city, and of all who dwell in it. This fourth woe is deeply personal and painfully prophetic. God turns his gaze toward leaders who use power to manipulate, exploit, and humiliate others, and he is not silent. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor. This is not about hospitality. This is about coercion disguised as generosity. It is about seducing others into weakness, not to help them, but to expose them, that you may look on their nakedness. This is a metaphor for spiritual abuse, political corruption, and moral perversion. It is the tactic of the predator. Lower someone's defenses in order to dominate, control, and strip them of dignity. God sees it, and he does not turn away. You are filled with shame instead of glory. The one who sought to shame others will be shamed by God. The one who poured the cup for control will drink from the cup of wrath. This is divine retribution. This is the reversal of corruption. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you. In Scripture, the cup often symbolizes destiny, either blessing or judgment, and here the corrupt drink judgment. God says, your glory will be covered in shame, your false image, your manipulation, your protected status, it will be stripped. The truth will be revealed. Then the Lord references violence against Lebanon, a poetic image of devastation. He speaks of bloodshed, of terror, of harm done to both people and creation. No injustice is forgotten, not in the forest, not in the cities, not in the souls of those who were violated by systems that claim to serve them. This is not just about ancient kings. This is about every spiritual, political, and economic leader who uses influence to exploit instead of protect. Every system that humiliates the weak to empower the proud. Every platform that intoxicates others with lies to maintain control. God will overturn every abusive system. What was done in darkness will be shouted from the rooftops. What was manipulated behind closed doors will be exposed in the courts of heaven, and then in the sight of all. No leader is beyond his reach. No mask can hide corruption from his eyes, and no one who brings shame on others will escape their own, unless they repent. Let your leadership be clean. Let your influence be holy. And if you have been a victim of such abuse, know this: God saw it, and God will act. The Lord is in his holy temple. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 18 through 20. What profit is the image that its maker should carve it, the molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it, to make mute idols? Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, shall it teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. After 5 piercing woes, after heaven exposes greed, corruption, violence, exploitation, and pride, we arrive at a divine contrast so sharp it cuts through time. We are brought face to face with the end of human arrogance and the unshakable supremacy of the living God. The idols are exposed, not just carved statues, but symbols of a deeper sickness, the human tendency to create gods in our own image, to worship the works of our own hands, to trust in structures we control, to place faith in what cannot breathe. They are mute, powerless. They wear gold like royalty, but carry death like disease. They look sacred, but they deceive. God calls them what they truly are, teachers of lies. This is more than an ancient critique. This is a present-day confrontation. Because idols today still speak in silence, through digital obsession, through money worship, through political idolatry, through self-centered religion, through movements that promise freedom but enslave hearts. We are still surrounded by altars, shiny, seductive, silent altars that cannot speak, cannot teach, cannot save. And then the thunder falls. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. With one line, the false is crushed beneath the weight of the real. With one sentence, the noise of idols is silenced by the presence of the King. God is not in hiding. He is not caught off guard. He is not debating justice in some cosmic courtroom. He is enthroned, seated, unmoved, ruling from his holy place. His temple is not shaken by empires. His throne is not threatened by Babylon. He sees everything. He knows everything. He reigns over everything. And in that holy reality, silence is the only fitting response, not silence of emptiness, but silence of awe. The kind that fills a room when glory descends, the kind that causes angels to cover their faces, the kind that falls over a soul when eternity brushes against time. This is not passive silence, it is active surrender, it is the soul falling flat before the weight of divine majesty. It is stillness that speaks louder than sermons, it is worship without sound, but filled with fire. Let this silence crush your idols. Let it drown out the fear that screams. Let it confront the systems of control you have built. Let it recenter your life around the only voice that matters. Because when the world trembles, when justice feels delayed, when noise rises like a flood, the temple stands, and God still reigns. So here is the call. Climb the hill of the Lord in your spirit. Enter his holy temple. Turn off the voices that lie. Shut out the noise that distracts. Lay down the idols that promise everything but give nothing. And let your soul grow silent before the one who speaks worlds into being. He is in his temple. He is not shaken. He is not silent. He is holy. Let all the earth keep silence before him. A prayer of the prophet in trouble. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, verses 1 through 2. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. O Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. After all the visions, after all the shaking, after the 5 divine woes echoing like thunder across the land, Habakkuk doesn't collapse into despair. He doesn't run from what God revealed. He doesn't cling to his fears or harden his heart. He prays. And this is the turning point. This is where revelation becomes intimacy, where theology becomes communion, where a prophet becomes a priest before the altar of a holy God. This is the sign of a true servant of the Lord, not just one who declares what's coming, but one who weeps over it, one who goes beyond pronouncement into intercession. O Lord, I have heard your speech, and I was afraid. This is not terror, this is not dread, this is holy trembling, the weight of divine presence settling on a fragile human soul. This is the fear of the Lord that humbles, not paralyzes, that cleanses, not condemns. Habakkuk knows God is not distant, he is not silent, he has spoken, he is moving, and that alone is enough to undo a man from the inside out. But in this fear, the prophet does not retreat, he reaches. Revive your work in the midst of the years. This is not a cry for novelty, it is a plea for renewal. For God to do again what only he can do, to shake nations, to part waters, to break chains, to send fire, to breathe on dry bones, to awaken what is asleep in the middle of the years, not in the beginning, not at the end, but now, in the messy, uncertain middle, right here, in the tension, in the waiting room of fulfillment. When prophecy feels delayed and darkness feels loud, Habakkuk doesn't ask for rescue, he asks for revival, not escape from the judgment, but glory in the midst of it. He's not running from the shaking, he's asking God to move through it. And then he speaks a line so bold, so holy, so piercing, that it has echoed for generations. In wrath, remember mercy. This is the language of the remnant. This is the voice of one who knows both the fire and the fragrance of God. He does not deny judgment. He does not try to soften justice. He does not apologize for holiness, but he knows the deeper nature of the one he serves. Mercy always walks beside wrath, because love is at the center of both. And in that love, he pleads, Lord, even when you are right to punish, let your compassion flow. Even when you shake the nations, let mercy rise like morning dew. Even when you bring the sword, let healing not be far behind. This is the prayer that shifts atmospheres. This is the intercession that holds back storms. This is the kind of heart God looks for, not one that hides from judgment, but one that worships through it. So the lesson is this: true prophets do more than see, they stand. They do more than speak, they kneel. They do more than know, they feel. And in their trembling they release the kind of prayer that moves heaven, not self-centered requests, not surface-level petitions, but prayers filled with history, hunger, and holy desperation. Revive your work, not my dream, not my ministry, not my comfort. Your work, in the middle of these years, in the days of drought, in the middle of shaking, in the tension between what you've done and what you've promised. If that is your prayer, then you are walking the same road as Habakkuk. You're not asking God to change his mind. You're asking him to reveal his heart. And you can be sure of this: the God who split seas, broke idols, raised prophets, and poured out fire is not done. He is still the God of the mountain, still the God of the thunder, still the God who revives what religion cannot, still the God who remembers mercy in the middle of wrath. So ask him, wait for him, cry out to him, and don't stop until he moves again. God marches through history. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, verses 3 through 7. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Before him went pestilence, and fever followed at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations. And the everlasting mountains were scattered, the perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian trembled. Something shifts in the spirit of Habakkuk. He no longer speaks from the valley of complaint. He no longer stands on the wall waiting for answers. He has been drawn into something greater, a vision not just of what will happen, but of who is coming. This is not metaphor. This is divine reality breaking into human perception. This is what happens when the veil is pulled back, when a prophet sees beyond the politics, beyond the crisis, beyond the earthly shaking, and beholds the Lord of glory marching through history with fire in his steps and thunder in his voice. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. These names are not arbitrary. They are echoes of Sinai, of the wilderness, of covenant, of glory revealed in a storm. They are places where heaven touched earth with smoke, sound, and trembling. This is not a new visitation. This is the return of the God of the Exodus, the God who delivered with fire, who spoke through cloud, who shook the nations to free his people. His glory covered the heavens. His brightness was like the sun exploding across eternity. Flashes of power shoot from his hands, strength cloaked in light, majesty too great to measure. He does not arrive with subtlety. He breaks in with brilliance, and the earth is full of his praise, even before men recognize it. Before him goes pestilence. Fever follows at his feet. Even what we call disaster submits to his authority. Nothing is random when God walks the earth. He is not reacting to chaos. He commands it. He stands and measures the earth. He looks, and nations tremble. Mountains, those symbols of permanence and power, scatter like sand. The hills bow. Foundations collapse. Time itself bends under the weight of his presence. His ways are everlasting. This is not the reaction of a God surprised. This is the intentional movement of the eternal. He has not changed. He will not change. And he is not passive. He is not watching history. He is writing it. The tents of Cushan shake. The land of Midian trembles. Places far from the epicenter feel the impact, because when God arises, no one is untouched. Even regions not expecting him are awakened by his steps. So what does this mean for us? It means you are not forgotten in your shaking. It means the injustice you see is not ignored. It means the rise of wickedness is not beyond his reach. Because God is not sitting still, he is marching through time with purpose. And when he rises, no enemy, no empire, no idol, no system of man can stand. He does not come as a whisper, he comes as a commander. He comes not to ask for permission, but to establish his dominion. This is your encouragement. If it feels like darkness is winning, remember the light is moving. If it feels like your prayers are echoing, remember the King is marching. If it feels like evil has the upper hand, remember his footsteps shake the mountains. And he is not done. He is not behind. He is not confused. He is not overpowered. He is moving. And nothing remains the same when God walks through history. So let your heart take courage. Let your spirit rise, because the Holy One is near. And the earth, once again, will be full of his praise. God's wrath and mercy in balance. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. O Lord, were you displeased with the rivers? Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea that you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made quite ready. Oaths were sworn over your arrows. You divided the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered its voice and lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of your arrows they went, at the shining of your glittering spear. You marched through the land in indignation. You trampled the nations in anger. In this sacred portion of Habakkuk's vision, we step into a storm unlike any other. Not a natural storm, a divine eruption. Not the trembling of weather patterns, but the trembling of everything man has built in rebellion against God. And the prophet does not flinch from the image. He watches and writes what he sees. But his questions reveal the depth of the mystery. Lord, were you angry at the rivers? Did the sea provoke you? Is nature your enemy? The answer is no. The rivers, the seas, the mountains, they are not the target. They are the witnesses. The battlefield is not just the physical world. It is the spiritual system of oppression and pride that stands against the purposes of God. Habakkuk sees God riding, not walking, not standing still, but moving across the earth like a general in a cosmic war. He rides on horses. He commands chariots, but they are not chariots of death. They are chariots of salvation. Even his anger is redemptive. Even his wrath is intentional. He is not lashing out. He is carving a path for deliverance. And then we see the weapons. The bow is drawn. The arrows are prepared. But these are not ordinary weapons. They are sealed with divine oaths. Every shot fired is backed by a promise. Every act of judgment is fulfillment, not reaction. He divides the earth with rivers. He speaks, and the deep responds. The mountains tremble, the heavens realign. Even the sun and moon pause in their courses because the commander of time is moving. This is not mythology. This is prophecy. This is not poetry for emotion's sake. It is revelation for a generation that must understand both the fire and the mercy of God. And here lies the balance. This is not chaos, it is correction. This is not rage, it is righteous love defending what is holy. God is not destroying for destruction's sake. He is clearing the battlefield. He is removing altars built to pride. He is dismantling systems built on blood. He is shaking what man called secure, so that only what is unshakable may remain. He is making room for righteousness, room for his name, room for his glory to dwell, room for salvation to come where rebellion once ruled. The wrath of God is not the opposite of his love. It is the expression of it, a holy fire that refuses to let injustice go unchallenged. And even as the storm rages, even as the earth splits, even as the arrows fly, he remembers mercy, because wrath is temporary, but mercy is eternal. Judgment clears the way, but grace builds what remains. So the lesson is this: do not fear the shaking when you know the one who shakes. Do not run from the fire when you belong to the one who commands it. Do not mistake the thunder for the absence of love. It may just be the sound of God making a way for redemption. If he is shaking your world, if he is confronting your idols, if he is walking through the ruins of your comfort, it may be that he is preparing you for something higher, holier, and more eternal than you imagined. Because when God moves, nothing stays the same, and when he judges, it is to make room for what cannot be corrupted. So let your heart not fear the fury. Let it fall in reverent worship, because in wrath he remembers mercy, and in judgment he still makes a way. God fights for the salvation of his people. Text-base the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, verses 13 through 15. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for salvation with your anointed. You struck the head from the house of the wicked by laying bare from foundation to neck. You thrust through with his own arrows the head of his villages. They came out like a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was like feasting on the poor in secret. You walked through the sea with your horses, through the heap of great waters. Now the vision turns personal, direct, and fierce. This is not a poetic scene from a distant realm. This is the warrior God, not watching from a throne, not whispering from a distance, but rising with fire in his eyes and salvation in his hands. Habakkuk sees him move, and not just to judge, but to save. You went forth for the salvation of your people. Let those words echo in your spirit, because that is his motive. That has always been his motive. Not destruction for the sake of wrath, but divine confrontation for the sake of deliverance. He goes forth, not in anger alone, but in covenant faithfulness. He moves for the sake of the promise, for the sake of the oppressed, for the sake of his own name. And how does he save? He strikes the head from the house of the wicked. He doesn't just cut branches, he uproots the tree. He doesn't just resist evil, he decapitates it. This is Genesis chapter 3, fulfilled in prophetic vision. The seed of the woman shall crush the serpent's head. And here, God himself comes in fury and finality to fulfill his ancient word. He lays bare the foundation to the neck. He tears open what was hidden. He exposes what was buried. Because he is not satisfied with surface change, he strikes the root. And then, in poetic irony, he turns the enemy's own weapons against him. You thrust through with his own arrows. The strategy designed to scatter God's people becomes the trap that undoes the oppressor. This is what God does. He flips the battlefield. He takes what the enemy meant for evil and makes it the tool of deliverance. Just like Pharaoh's pride hardened his heart to ride into the sea, only to meet the crushing wave of God's justice. Just like Goliath's sword was used to cut off his own head. Just like the cross, a Roman execution tool, became the very instrument of eternal salvation. The enemy came like a whirlwind, fast, violent, deceptive. They rejoiced in private while the poor suffered in silence. But God does not miss what is done in secret. He does not sleep when the righteous are mistreated, and he does not stay silent. He rides through the sea, through the heap of great waters. This is Exodus language. This is the God of deliverance, returning to the battlefield. The same God who split the Red Sea, the same God who drowned Pharaoh's army, the same God who made a highway through the impossible, is riding again. So the lesson is clear. God is not passive. He is not a bystander. He is not a distant deity. He is a warrior, he fights, he defends, he delivers, and when he rises no enemy can stand, no lie can hide, no chain can hold. For those who trust him, he is not only king, he is rescuer, he is defender, he is the one who fights when you are too weak to lift your sword. So let your faith rise again, even if you feel surrounded, even if it looks like evil has the upper hand, even if your strength is gone. Because the one who fought for Israel still fights for you. Not with human strength, but with holy fire, not just to protect, but to redeem, not just to correct, but to restore. He rides through history, through waters, through storms, for the salvation of his people and for the glory of his name. When strength fails, but faith stands. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, verse 16. When I heard, my body trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he comes up to the people, he will invade them with his troops. At this moment in the vision, something sacred happens. The prophet who stood on the watchtower, the man who asked bold questions, the voice who received terrifying revelation, now simply becomes human, and he does not hide it. He does not wear the mask of the unshaken. He does not pretend that faith has made him immune to emotion. He trembles, not just a poetic line. It is a full-body collapse under the weight of divine glory and coming judgment. My body trembled, my lips quivered, rottenness entered my bones. I trembled in myself. This is not weakness. This is what holiness does to flesh. This is what happens when a mortal soul stands too close to eternal fire. This is what real encounter feels like. Because when we see God in his fullness, not just as comforter but as judge, not just as father but as commander, not just as friend but as consuming fire, something breaks open inside of us. Our confidence in ourselves dissolves. Our ability to handle it disappears, and all that's left is raw reverence. And yet, even in that trembling, even with weak knees and a heavy heart, Habakkuk chooses rest, that I might rest in the day of trouble. He does not say, so I might escape. He does not say, so I might fight harder. He says, so I might rest. This is the tension of mature faith, not blind optimism, not emotional denial, but reverent surrender. He's not okay, but he trusts anyway. He doesn't feel strong, but he waits anyway. This is the kind of faith that holds when everything else breaks, because real courage is not the absence of shaking. It is the refusal to walk away when you're overwhelmed. It is standing in the storm, not because you feel secure, but because you know the one who commands the wind. Habakkuk doesn't deny the coming invasion. He doesn't minimize the pain ahead. He simply chooses to rest in the God he cannot predict, but refuses to stop trusting. So the lesson is this: God never asked you to be unshakable. He asked you to be faithful. He never told you not to tremble. He just told you not to quit. Because it is possible to shake with fear and still stand in trust. It is possible to be undone by the moment, but still anchored in eternity. It is possible to feel your strength fading and still say, I will wait for you. This is what separates shallow religion from deep faith. This is what survives Babylon. This is what endures the delay of vision. This is what carries the remnant through fire and famine and judgment and silence. Faith that stands when strength fails. So let this be your cry. Lord, I may tremble, but I will not run. I may not understand, but I will still believe. I may feel weak, but I will wait, because you are still holy, still good, still worthy, and even in the shaking, I will stand. Joy in the midst of barrenness. The Lord is my strength. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on my high hills. These are not just poetic words. They are a battle cry of unshakable faith in the middle of devastation. They are a declaration forged in fire, and they are a challenge to every generation who dares to trust God beyond the blessings. Habakkuk has walked through the full arc of spiritual encounter. He has questioned, he has trembled, he has waited, he has seen the storm of judgment forming on the horizon. And now, knowing that not all prayers may be answered the way he hoped, he still makes a decision. Yet I will rejoice. This kind of praise isn't natural, it's supernatural. This is not optimism. This is not emotional denial. This is prophetic joy, joy that defies the drought. Let me ask you, have you learned how to rejoice in what hasn't happened? Can you praise when the vine is empty? Can you lift your hands when your heart feels heavy? Because this is where real faith is revealed. Not when the promise is fulfilled, but when the silence is loud and you praise anyway. Look at the losses he lists. No figs, no grapes, no olives, no grain, no sheep, no cattle. This is total agricultural collapse in an agrarian economy. This is not symbolic for Habakkuk. This is survival. He is saying, even if everything I depend on disappears, even if every system fails, even if everything I worked for dies in front of me, I will still choose joy. That is not weakness. That is not recklessness. That is mature, tested, anchored faith. And why does he rejoice? Because God is not only the God of the harvest, he is the God of salvation. He doesn't rejoice in what God gives. He rejoices in who God is. So I ask you, is your joy rooted in the presence of God or in the presence of results? Because the results may vanish, but the God of your salvation will never leave. Now Habakkuk declares something even bolder. The Lord God is my strength. Not was, not might be, is. This is a present tense declaration in the middle of a future tense crisis. He's saying, I may not know what's coming, but I know who's carrying me through it. This is not emotional strength. This is not performance faith. This is prophetic empowerment, strength born in surrender. And what does God do with those who rejoice in the barrenness? He gives them feet like the deer. This is the language of supernatural elevation. Deer are not afraid of rocky cliffs. They move with confidence in places that terrify others. And that's what God promises. You will not stumble where others fall. You will not freeze where others panic. You will not sink. You will stand, because he will make you walk on your high hills. This is more than recovery. This is more than survival. This is placement. God doesn't just restore your strength, he promotes your position. He lifts those who learn to praise in the valley and places them where they can see above the chaos. So I ask again, what valley have you been walking through? What barrenness have you been facing? Have you been waiting to rejoice until something changes, when maybe your rejoicing is the very thing that will change everything? Maybe you've been saying, when the fig tree blossoms, then I'll praise. When the breakthrough comes, then I'll worship. When the stall is full, then I'll testify. But God is saying, will you rejoice when there is no reason to except me? Will you worship when you're not winning? Will you declare my goodness when nothing looks good around you? Because that kind of praise, that is the praise that shifts atmospheres. That is the praise that confuses the enemy. That is the praise that prepares your feet for the high places. So here's your call today. If the fig tree doesn't blossom, still praise. If the vines are empty, still sing. If the fields are dry, still dance. If the stalls are silent, still declare, the Lord God is my strength. He gives me feet for the mountain. He prepares me for the climb. He is enough. Even if I lose it all, I have him. And that is everything. Let your joy rise, not from the harvest, but from the throne. Let your worship be defiant. Let your faith walk where others crawl. And let your voice declare, he is faithful. He is my strength, and I will rejoice, always, from complaint to confidence. Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapters 1 through 3. Summary. The story of Habakkuk is not just a prophetic vision, it is a journey of the soul. It begins not in the heavens, but in the dirt of frustration. In chapter 1, we meet a prophet who is tired. He is burdened by what he sees: violence in the streets, injustice in the courts, corruption in leadership, and silence from heaven. And he dares to ask, "How long, Lord? Why do you tolerate evil?" Maybe you've asked the same questions. Maybe your prayers have sounded more like protests. Maybe your worship has felt like wrestling. If so, then you are not far from the heart of a prophet. Habakkuk is bold, but he is also broken. He doesn't curse God, but he doesn't pretend either. He brings real questions to the real God, not filtered, not polished, just honest. But he does not stop there. In chapter 2, something shifts. He climbs the watchtower, not to shout louder, but to listen deeper. He makes the decision that defines every growing believer: I will wait for what God says. He stops reacting and starts receiving. He stops explaining and starts expecting. And what happens? He receives a vision. He learns that the just shall live by faith. He discovers that delay is not denial, that God is not absent. He is preparing, that what seems like silence may be divine setup. And finally, in chapter 3, something beautiful happens. The world has not changed. The economy is still uncertain. The enemy still marches. The harvest still looks empty. But Habakkuk has changed. The complaint has become a conversation. The trembling has become trust. The fear has become fire. The silence has become a song. He says, "Though the fig tree does not blossom, yet I will rejoice. The Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He sets me on high places." He does not worship because things are fixed. He worships because he has been fixed. Let me ask you, where are you in the journey? Are you still in chapter 1, crying out in confusion? Are you in chapter 2, learning to wait and write what God speaks? Or have you come into chapter 3, where worship rises even when results don't? Wherever you are, God is with you. He is not offended by your questions. He is not disappointed by your doubts. He invites you into deeper dialogue, into real trust, into a faith that doesn't need to see the end to keep walking. Because spiritual maturity is not pretending to be strong. It's knowing where true strength comes from. It's saying, I don't understand everything, but I know the one who does, and he is enough. Your journey may have started in complaint, but it's not meant to stay there. Let God walk you into confidence. Let him show you the high places. Let him build your feet for the climb. Let him turn your questions into vision and your silence into a song. Because the same God who answered Habakkuk still answers today, and his strength has not changed. So lift your eyes, take your place, climb your watchtower, write what you hear, and let your worship rise. Even if, even now, even still, a hidden roadmap for end-time believers. Text base, the entire book of Habakkuk. The book of Habakkuk is not only a prophetic conversation from the past, it is a hidden roadmap for the last days. Every movement in this short book mirrors the spiritual dynamics of the end times: chaos, corruption, divine delay, judgment, and ultimately, global awakening. In chapter 1, the prophet cries out in the middle of national crisis. Violence fills the streets. Justice is distorted. Leaders are corrupt. The wicked surround the righteous. And the prophet is bold enough to ask, God, where are you? This is the cry of the end-time church, a generation staring at injustice, betrayal, deception, and spiritual confusion, and wondering if God still sees, still speaks, still acts. Then comes the divine response. God is raising up Babylon, not ancient Babylon alone, but the spirit of Babylon, the arrogant system that builds through blood, deceives through wealth, intoxicates with power, and opposes the purposes of God. This spirit is rising again, on global platforms, in political alliances, in economic systems, and even within compromised religion. But here lies the call to the remnant. The just shall live by faith, not by fear, not by compromise, not by political survival, but by unwavering trust in the voice, character, and plan of God. In chapter 2, the prophet is told to wait, to write the vision, to trust the timing, because even if it delays, it will surely come. And that is where many end-time believers are now, in the waiting, in the watching, in the tension between promise and fulfillment. Then, in chapter 3, Habakkuk moves into intercession. He cries out, "Revive your work in the midst of the years. In wrath, remember mercy." This is the cry of the remnant church, not for escape, but for awakening, not for avoidance, but for revival in the midst of judgment. And then God marches, not silently, not gently, but with glory, fire, and power. The prophet sees him, shaking nations, toppling pride, crushing evil, saving his people, and he trembles. But by the end, he declares, even if the fig tree does not blossom, even if the fields are empty, even if all visible hope is gone, yet I will rejoice. The Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer. He places me on high places. Habakkuk is a prophetic blueprint for every end-time believer. When Babylon rises, God raises a remnant. When justice is delayed, vision must be written. When fear grows, faith must rise. When shaking comes, worship becomes warfare. And when the world seems to unravel, the righteous do not collapse. They stand, they sing, they soar, because the final word does not belong to Babylon, it belongs to the Lord. Will you stand on your watch? Text base, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 1, revisited. I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. We have journeyed through complaint, confusion, confrontation, and glory. We have watched Habakkuk move from trembling to trust, from questions to confidence, from lament to praise. But now the final question turns to us, not to Babylon, not to history, not to the nations, but to you. Will you stand on your watch? Will you be like Habakkuk, a believer who climbs the wall when the world collapses, a voice who waits for vision instead of rushing to speak, a soul who still believes that God has something to say? Because this generation needs watchmen again, not just influencers, not just speakers, but those who will take their post in the Spirit and not move until heaven speaks. To stand on the watch means to say no to comfort. It means to embrace silence, to embrace discipline, to look above the noise, to wait when others quit, to believe that God still speaks if we will only listen. Habakkuk did not have a title. He had a burden. He did not build a platform. He built a place of watching. And because he stood his post, a vision came, a vision that shaped generations, a vision that pierced through time and declared, "The just shall live by faith." God is still speaking. But are you still listening? He is still giving vision, but only to those who climb the rampart. He is still revealing truth, but only to those who value it more than comfort. He is still stirring revival, but only through those willing to wait until the fire falls. Will you take your post? Will you write what he shows you? Will you stand in the tension, endure the silence, and not leave your wall until heaven opens? Because in these last days, the difference between collapse and clarity will come down to who stood their watch and who walked away. Let your heart burn again. Let your ears open again. Let your eyes look higher, and let your life become a watchtower for the voice of God. The Lord is still in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him, and let his watchmen rise. Which of these 23 lessons awakened your heart the most? Was it the call to live by faith when everything around you shakes? Was it the image of God marching through history to deliver his people? Or was it that quiet, trembling moment when the prophet said, "Even if the fig tree does not blossom, yet I will rejoice"? This journey through the book of Habakkuk was never meant to stay on the page. It was meant to awaken something inside you, because now the question is personal. What vision has God placed in you that needs to be written? What truth has been burning in your spirit, waiting for you to make it plain? What idols or fears must be surrendered so you can finally climb your watchtower? Maybe you've been watching the chaos and asking, where is God? Why the silence? Why the delay? But now you know. He is in his holy temple. He is speaking, and he is calling you to rise. So here is the final call. Comment below. Share which moment pierced your heart. Speak it out. Let your testimony stir someone else's faith. Then share this video with someone who feels lost in the noise. Someone who needs to know that hope is not gone, that God is not finished, that faith still stands. And above all, remember this truth. When the world shakes, when Babylon rises, when justice feels delayed, when the storm gets loud, God still reigns from his holy temple. He has the final word. Now take your place, take your post, take your pen, and write the vision. He is coming.